Hello everyone, thank you for joining the webinar today. We'll wait for a few more attendees to join for 1 or 2 minutes. And participants except panelists and presenters will have the video turned up and the audio mute for the duration of the session. So you can use the Q&A panel to add your questions, comments, etc. Also do note that the event is being recorded and a few screenshots will be taken for documentation and reporting. So thank you for your consent and cooperation in advance. And we'll share the webinar recording with the attendees at the end of the webinar, and the resources will of course be available on our website as well. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Imran Motin, our Executive Director at BIGD. Thank you.
Thank you, Irad, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is being organized by BIGD in partnership with PPRC, and a lot of the findings and evidence based on which we will be discussing today is based on a work that we have been doing jointly with PPRC. And I would like to also obviously welcome Zilur Bhai, who is the executive chair of PPRC, who will actually towards the end try and wrap up and conclude and help us kind of look ahead in terms of a future oriented agenda. So just to sort of start off, so this is a series that we are trying to start, which is we're calling this evidence to action, and sort of very deliberately we are calling it action rather than policy, because we think you need far more deeper conversations and even richer evidence to actually be able to talk about policy in that strict sense of the term. So we are keeping it more broad. So it's going to be not only policy, but also interventions. It's also programs. It's also further research that we may be interested in. So it's basically taking evidence from a level that we are at to the next level in terms of action. So that is the whole idea. And we sort of built on the current evidence base that we have until now. So that's what we are trying to do here today. We have prepared a brief based on the current state of evidence from Bangladesh on COVID effects on education learning, which we are going to be finalizing based on today's conversations and discussions that we're going to have. So there's actually a concrete output that we would like to get out of today's conversation as well. So that's also another important objective here. So the title is COVID-19 and the Deepening Learning Crisis. How can we build forward better? And I just want to, kind of just pull out some words from there, because I think terms which I think we have sort of deliberately put there. So deepening learning crisis. So we think there is a deepening learning crisis. We think there's an ongoing learning crisis on which is this sort of, it has deepened, and we want to really understand how far it has deepened, what are the risks, that we see going forward, and what are maybe some of the mechanisms through which this deepening has happened as well. Of course, we are not going to be talking about rigorous, mechanism identification, but in a descriptive way, what are the mechanisms that we basically see through which the learning crisis is perhaps deepening. And then we want to talk about how can we build forward better. And deliberately, we're not saying build back, because there's actually, we need to move from a resilience agenda to, I think, what I would like to call an anti-fragile agenda, right? So because the resilience agenda actually, doesn't help us. Because building back to what? Building back to a learning crisis that we already had. We need to really think about how do we build forward better, and I think how do we maybe think creatively about the possibilities that perhaps this crisis in some ways gives us, and we need to be really bold and creative about thinking about those possibilities. To really think about how to build forward better. And that is why the anti-fragile thinking is a much more important framework. And I'm obviously borrowing from Nicholas Taleb here, than a resilient framework. And I think that's sort of another, kind of ethos or theme that I think we need to, I would like to, perhaps bring into the conversation that we're going to have today. we have a fantastic panel. I thank everyone. I'll sort of introduce as they come along, but we really have a global panel, a global and a very rich national kind of panel. So I think we really look forward to really kind of useful, forward-looking, helpful conversation in terms of tackling this deepening crisis that is staring at our face, which is most likely going to be the most important and lasting crisis of COVID in terms of what it may mean for our socioeconomic ambitions. So I think this is perhaps one of the biggest and deepest reversals that may happen if you don't do anything about it. So I think that's what that sort of challenge is, if you like. So there will be two keynote presentations, really, or keynotes, trigger presentations, really. So I'm going to be really talking about evidence-based from Bangladesh. And then we'll have Rachel to talk about global evidence-based. And she has been, from FCDO doing, looking at the global evidence-based around COVID effect on learning and, what it may, kind of lead to and what type of interventions have worked until now. So Rachel will be doing the other trigger presentation. And based on this trigger presentation, we're going to have a conversation. And then we'll sort of open up for some Q&A. So it's sort of fairly simple type of structure. And then towards the end, I would invite Zilur to sort of wrap up and help us lift up the conversation and help us look ahead in terms of what are the ideas that is emerging from here, because we really want to use this conversation to take us forward. Okay, so that's by the way of introduction. So let me now move to the presentation on evidence from Bangladesh. So let's get to that presentation. Irad, would you get the slides up, please? Okay, so let's move to the first slide. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so the first thing, I really want to start off with acknowledging, the work that we did jointly and a lot of the research that we're going to be talking about. Can we move to the first slide, the other slide, please? Yeah, this is just a sec here. So a lot of the evidence that we're going to be drawing from is based on the PPRC BIGD partnership research that we have been doing around COVID for the last 1 year. And in the third round of survey, we really, we had a module where we looked at this whole educational life of children, and we're going to draw a lot based on that survey, but there are other surveys as well we'll basically draw on, but really want to acknowledge the people who worked in this. On the BIGD side, Atir Rahman, I've been involved, and Saiful Islam, and PPRC side, Zillur Bhai, Umama, and Bilal Hussain, and then we had a bunch of people from different sectors that we brought together to really help us think through, but also the field researchers. We had a field research team who basically were involved. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, next one, please. I have to move a bit faster. Okay, so the first point, just to sort of step back and what was the situation, what's the context? I mean, we know the education institutions have been closed since 18 March, and it's been closed since then. That doesn't mean that the government hasn't taken steps in terms of some kind of learning to be going on, and we'll talk about how some of those have worked, but the schools physically have been closed. And it's one of the first things that's been closed and remains to be closed until now. So I think in terms of the overall lockdown or kind of containment strategy, I think the school closure has been the lasting one that the government has continued on, and I think that is itself an important I think fact, and important one to really understand the pros and cons of. The second point is that even before the pandemic, we had a learning crisis. We have a very flat, what is known as the learning to grade completion curve. So 58% of Bangladeshi children did not achieve minimum reading proficiency by grade 5, even before the pandemic. This is according to the Mix Survey 2019. And according to World Bank, this figure may increase to 76% due to prolonged school closure. So this may actually sort of increase, as one would possibly expect. But what we really try to understand is, how it may increase, and what are the issues that may sort of emerge out of it. So there are three issues that we want to really talk about in terms of the learning crisis. The first is, so there's a learning retention loss from the simple fact that schools are closed, right? So there's a school closure effect, and then there is an inadequate learning due to school closure effect. So there's a retention loss simply because schools are closed, and then there's an inadequate learning or coping mechanism that may be happening at the household level that may add to that learning retention. So overall learning loss is a combination of the retention loss and then inadequate learning within the home because of many factors due to school closure. And I think it's important to think about those two mechanisms a bit sort of separately. They intersect, of course. The second is there's a deepening inequality of the learning opportunities. And that's basically because of both socioeconomic and digital divide. And we'll talk about that. And then finally, the issue is about dropout risk after the school reopens. Okay, next slide, please. So let's take one by one. So the learning retention loss due to inadequate learning to school closure. Let's look at that, what we see from our surveys. So first of all, I mean, we did, along with Malaya University, with the researcher, his name is Niyaz Asadullah. We worked together, and very early on in May 2020, we looked at what was happening in terms of time use, educational time use. We did a kind of a brief time use survey. Of course, it was over phone, so we could not really do a very detailed time use survey. And what we found is that there was an 80% reduction in terms of educational time, if you like, of children, right, in the early period. So very early on, and I mean, that one may expect, it was, maybe children thought it was just, or parents thought it was a temporary thing, it was a holiday and all that stuff. I guess that's understandable, but very early on, there was a deep reduction in terms of educational time that children were actually sort of using as input towards education, towards education. It's an 80% drop. Let's move to the next slide. And what we see in the PPRC BIGD survey in March 21, so that one was done almost a year later, we see the kind of a continuation of that. We did not do a time use survey, but we see that risk deepening. And that there have been more coping mechanism or more inputs in terms of learning time or educational time, but those have been really inadequate and have been very incomplete and partial. And that is causing the potential learning loss and the learning crisis. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we try to really think about in the PPRC BIGD survey is, how do we identify children who are at the risk of learning loss? And we came up with this simple framework that we said, okay, those who are not studying or have stopped education, those who are studying unsupervised by themselves, and those who have irregular or infrequent modes of study during the school closure. These are children who are in this group, in this type of situation, are identified as being risk of learning loss. Now, this is most likely a lower bound of the learning loss, of course, because there are there may be children who are not unsupervised, but who may be going and kind of taking on some coaching, but the quality of that coaching we don't know what the quality of the coaching is. So the actual learning loss may actually be higher than what we basically come up with. So what we find is 19% of primary and 25% of secondary students are estimated to be at sort of learning loss. This is approximately estimated, if you blow it up, to about 5.92 million school children. And the group that is the highest risk are secondary school boys, urban, living in urban areas. And that is, I think the urban phase of the COVID effects, be it in economic, dimension, in the sort of in even in learning dimension, we find that to be extremely important. So urban secondary school boys is the highest risk group that we basically find among our different groups that we looked at in terms of learning loss. Next slide, please. Okay, and we also asked parents and guardians, and we found that the top concerns for parent and guardian in terms of, during the school closure and what will happen after school opens, is about motivation loss and learning loss of children. This was the top concern among parents and guardians. It was not so much, that if school opens, we are scared about, the infection and, the health effect and all that. It was really around whether our children would be able to continue, would be motivated enough after such a prolonged school closure, and if it continues, and the learning loss that's basically happening. So there was a deep awareness that learning loss is happening. Next slide, please. So the first trigger question that I think, I would like to pose and, discuss today is how to deliver catch-up education. And, we have a lot of models of catch-up education. I think we have Rukmini here, the TARL model is a global model in terms of catch-up education, remedial education. We have, Asif here, BRAC has been doing non-formal primary education, BRAC school, that's also around catch-up. That is also a form of remedial education. So I think we really need to think about how to deliver catch-up education in this kind of a context to help students recover what they have lost and acquire grade-appropriate learning. Next slide, please. So the second issue, which is about the deepening inequality. Let's move to the next slide, please. So, so as I said, so there are two mechanisms through which we think this, deepening inequality is sort of happening. They interact, of course. So one is the sort of the worsening socioeconomic condition, and associated with that, the sort of the increasing cost of education, because to cope up right now during the school closure period, coaching and more market-based mechanisms seem to be the most prominent ones that households are having to basically use. So with a declining income, situation, when you have this type of a rising cost, the overall burden is extremely high. So that will basically lead to, the sort of inequality through the worsening economic channel, if you like. So, as you can see here, we see that 51% primary, 61% secondary students are relying on coaching and private tutoring during this COVID period, according to our survey. And what we see is that 33% increase that we see in terms of from pre-COVID in the urban slum areas in terms of educational costs. And this is primarily because of the reliance on the market-based mechanism, while the per capita income in the urban slum areas is still 14% below the pre-COVID level. So you can imagine the burden that this is going to cause and how long this type of investment can basically continue. Let's move to the next one. So the second mechanism is the digital divide inequality, and that's also really important. What we found that despite a lot of effort and kind of I think intent to provide different types of remote education, interventions by the government. What we found is this is a really small, the uptake of this is very low, and for many reasons. So we found that just 10% of students reported utilizing any type of distance learning, remote learning tools. What we found is the remote learning mechanism that was used, that was most popular or most predominant was online class. But this also happens to be the most dominant form of, of sort of, this is most sensitive to economic inequality, right? So you can see that for the poorest, for the poorest, this is only 6% of the children had reported this as a predominant mode, whereas for higher economic group it's 16%. So economic divide here is very high in the most predominant remote education mode, if you like, that where we find the highest uptake. And I think that's really, really important. We really need to think about hybrid innovations. We need to think about low-tech innovations here. This is the whole EdTech challenge here, is to really think about more low-tech and hybrid tech type of innovation that can really help here. And sort of, can we move to the next slide, please? So this is from another survey we did from BIGD. We did a digital literacy and access to public service survey. This is in 2019, and here we see the gender difference is really high among both adolescent and beyond, and the sort of youth group in terms of male-female difference in terms of internet access. And that, so there is a digital divide that is both economic and also gender. So I think both need to be thought through in a integrated way to be able to address this. Let's move to the next slide, please. So the trigger question here is how to ensure quality last mile delivery of education, one that does not exacerbate inequality. So we know there was already inequality, deepening inequality. And again, this is where I think building back better doesn't really help, because, this is, and the situation right now is such that if we let things the way they are, that's only going to exacerbate inequality. So I think that's the main point here. Next one, please. So the last is around dropout risk after school reopen. Next slide, please. Okay, so pre-COVID national dropout, 18% at primary and 38% in secondary level. This is according to band-based 2019 data. Right? So it's actually, primary and secondary, despite our high enrollment, we see, dropout actually remain to be high, especially at secondary, and more for boys than for girls. We know that. And also the learning was not really happening. So, so effective, if you like, effective education was not very, very high, despite very high levels of enrollment. So that's the baseline situation. That's where we were pre-COVID. Now, prolonged school closure can drastically increase dropout through two routes again. So one is worsening socioeconomic condition, and the second is the worsening ability to catch up, right? And both of these together can really lead to dropout that may not be realized in the short run, but maybe in the medium run. So actually in our survey, in our PPRC BIGD survey, we asked parents, will you send your children back to school after school reopens? Over 90% said yes, they will. But because of worsening socioeconomic condition and the education burden that we basically see, and the worsening ability to catch up because of all the inequalities that we talked about before, the dropout, they can be a kind of lag dropout effect. So it may not be immediate, but maybe in a year's time, because of the socioeconomic condition worsening and the ability to catch up, we may actually see, kind of high levels of dropout. And this is what we saw in Sierra Leone and Liberia in terms of other epidemics that basically happened. Can we move to the next slide, please? And then, yes, as I said, so it's basically, the dependence on sort of market. There's a deep concern about expense and expensive burden of education, and this is likely to have a lagged effect, perhaps in case of dropout, unless the economic condition really improves drastically, and also the learning learning interventions actually help reduce the learning loss that's basically happened. So both things need to basically happen. Both the economic improvement needs to happen at the household level, but at the same time, there has to be interventions to try and reverse the learning loss trajectory that we are in right now, which is deeply unequal as well. Can we move to the last slide, please? So the trigger question here is, how do we bring back children who are vulnerable to dropping out back to schools? So this is one question. I think it should be who are going to be vulnerable to dropping out back to school, because this is a more forward-looking question. And how do we provide better life opportunities to those who cannot come back, to dropout children who cannot come back to the classroom? And this is really around skill acquisition. How do we actually have a skills agenda that is also forward-looking here, and a more ambitious, forward-looking, future-oriented skills agenda. I think that's also very much part of this conversation. Last slide, please. Next slide. So just to sort of summarize, there are 3 issues and 4 trigger questions. The first is around retention loss. And the question there is, how do we deliver catch-up education? That's the main thing, so that, recover what they lost and acquire grade appropriate learning. The second is, how do we reduce inequalities, and how do we ensure quality last mile delivery of education, so that this inequality is not exacerbated. The baseline situation based on our data or evidence is that if you leave it the way it is going to be deeply unequal. And the third is, how do you reduce the dropout risk after school reopen? And that is, how do we ensure that those are vulnerable, we bring back, but also provide life opportunities, those who may not be able to come back to the classroom. So I think that's basically it in terms of the evidence, kind of presentation, trigger presentation from Bangladesh. I would now like to, perhaps, request Rachel to give her presentation, trigger presentation on global evidence, and on what are we learning from there. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aman. And if someone could put up my slides, that would be great. So as Imran has said, to complement the detailed data on what is happening in Bangladesh, I want to talk about an initiative we have been doing to think about the evidence at the international level, and an initiative that's been we've called Smart Buys. So if you go to the next slide. I'm not seeing the next slide.
There's a bit of
whether it's okay. Okay, yeah. I'll keep talking and just assume it'll come up. Great, here we go. So at the FCDO where I work, we were having a conversation with the World Bank about the need to bring together the global evidence on what is effective, and particularly what's cost effective in education. And we thought that education doesn't really have the equivalent of a Lancet Commission type approach, or like you have on climate change with the IPCC, to sort of have experts come together and say, what have we found as the most effective approaches? And so we called together a group of experts and created the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, which is the team you see in front of you. And it includes experts from economics, but also educationalists, and people from psychology and implementers, to really get a broad perspective on the evidence, and also people from across the world. So experts in Latin America and South Asia and Africa on the panel. So if you go to the next slide, I will start to just to say that we very much see this global evidence as one part of the puzzle, and only one part of the puzzle. So in addition to the, hopefully you're moving to the next slide. in addition to this global evidence, we think it's really important that you have a really good analysis of what are the country level challenges in education, and that's of exactly the kind that we've just seen Emran go through. Of what? Oh, sorry. Can you go back? So you need you need a good analysis of the local conditions of what is happening on the ground, as we've just heard for Bangladesh. But then once you've done that, you also need to learn about what is happening in other countries, and that is what we tried to do in the Smart Buys work. After you've done that, you also need to think very carefully about how to implement a given approach, what would work well locally. And so I think it's this mix of kind of local evidence about need and also implementation with the global evidence. So what I'm going to talk about is really about the local, the global evidence, and not so much tailored to Bangladesh. But I think that, we've got a great mix of people here. So if you move to the next slide, and I'll tell you a bit about some of the different, how we approach the challenge and some of the implications. So we looked at, as a panel, across a huge number of different studies. And what we were trying to look at was both what's the quality of the evidence in a certain area and its cost effectiveness in improving learning. So this was done pre-COVID, but I think a lot of the results are very relevant to the challenge that we find, or pre-COVID or in the midst of COVID, but it was drawing on evidence that had mainly been generated pre-COVID. But I think a lot of the evidence is very relevant. And we grouped things into different categories. Great buys are things that are where there's a lot of evidence in a lot of different contexts. Things have gone to scale and are extremely cost effective. The second there's only one in that category, by the way, which is about providing information to parents and students about the quality of schools, or whether their child is going to school, or relevant information for them to make decisions about education. So there are many, many different interventions that are all related to, where they all provide information of different kinds that are highly relevant locally to the decisions that people have to make. One of them is that's been tested a few times is giving information about the returns to going to school. The second category is good buys, where there's really good quality, rigorous evidence, tested a number of places and taken to scale. They're not quite as cost effective as the great buys, but they're still fantastically cost effective. And then we have categories of, where there's a few studies and it looks promising, but it's not really a huge amount of evidence. And finally, bad buys, where there's quite a lot of evidence, but things aren't cost effective. And I'm not going to talk too much about those, but I think it is very relevant in the COVID era, because we're going to have really tight budgets and a huge problem. So it becomes even more important that we focus our limited resources on the most cost-effective things to do. And bad buys include just sort of more inputs without changing the way that you teach. So, more textbooks, more computers, etc., just without any change in the way you teach is again and again and again been proved not to be effective. Okay, if you go to the next slide, and I will talk a little bit about some of the good buys that we found in the report. Oh, sorry. First, let me tell you, sorry, I forgot about this slide. This slide tells you just how important it is to focus on cost effectiveness, because you have absolutely huge differences between something that is very effective and cost effective and something that is effective. It works, but it's not as cost effective. And the most cost effective things are 10 or 100 times more effective than things than things that work. And these are a whole different set of categories that we looked at. I mentioned the giving information on education benefits is the top line, and each circle is a different study that has cost data. So there's many more studies that we looked at that didn't have cost data, but these are all the ones that looked at cost data. And the measurement here is LAYS, which is learning adjusted years of schooling, which is the metric that the World Bank recently introduced as part of its Human Capital Index. And the way to think of it is one learning adjusted year of schooling is equivalent to one highest possible quality years of schooling. So a lot of countries will get sort of, when a child goes to school for a year, they'll get only half a lay. So they'll learn half as much in a year as a child does in a very high quality education system. So you can think of one lay as like a year of Singapore or Finland equivalent learning. And this chart shows you how much you learn, how much you can get in terms of learning for $100 spent. And you'll see that some things, the very best you could get half a year or even a whole year of learning for just $100, which is Singapore equivalent, Finland equivalent year of learning for just $100, which is quite extraordinary. So with that, let me, that just shows you that good intervention, a good response versus a great response could be 10 times more effective than even a good response. So next slide, please. So let me talk in the next slide about all this range of different things that we found are good buys. And in the report, you will see quite a lot also about context. So in what kind of context would these things be a good buy? Because you can learn quite a lot from the research and the evidence about when these types of intervention will work. And let me pull, so some of these really answer Emran's questions about what do we do about children who've fallen behind, but also the increase in inequality in learning levels that we're getting as a result of COVID. And there's also some things about from this report that you can pull on to think about dropout. But I'm mainly going to focus on the learning loss. So structured lesson plans is something that has been proven to be highly effective in a number of different contexts, where you're not telling a teacher exactly what to say, minute by minute, but you're giving much more of a structure to what happens in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. So sort of giving a lot more hints about the pace at which teachers should go and how they should go about teaching. Because what we know across all of these different studies is the most effective way to address learning loss is through changing the way teachers teach. And so giving them some structure to help them work through that is one approach. And Another key approach that we think is extremely well designed to address the learning loss as a result of COVID is targeting teaching instruction by the learning level. So I'll dig into that a little bit if you're going on to the next slide. Now, obviously, we have Rukmini here, who is designed TAL, which for teaching at the right level, which is sometimes we use this term teaching at the right level to mean two different things. One is a very specific pedagogy developed by Pratham, which is teaching at the right level. And then there's a slightly more general concept, which I'm going to talk about, which is targeting teaching instruction by the learning level, not the grade level. And that is, there are a number of other ways to do it than the specific Pratham approach. So, and that just gives a little bit more flexibility about how you might try and introduce this. So what's the problem that this approach is designed to address? Well, often there's a very wide variety of learning levels within a class, and individual student learning levels are well below the grade level curriculum. Now, that is exactly the problem that we are all facing when children go back into the classroom. So that increase in inequality that Imran was talking about, and also the fact that there was just a huge learning loss. So you can't just go back and teach, the fourth grade curriculum to fourth graders, because fourth graders won't be at that level. They weren't before the crisis, and they're even less likely to be now. So how does this work? Well, some or all of the day, you first need to test and find out where children are, because otherwise you will be you won't know how to target the teaching. And then you need to design, and then the teaching needs to be designed to target the level that you discover that children are at. And there are a number of different ways that people have done this. But you can use government teachers, you can use volunteers, you can use teaching assistants, you can do it through school or after school or make up classes. I mean, one thing that has been tried, which might work well for COVID, is sort of catch-up camps during the holidays, but also schools have integrated this into their curriculums and their approach, so that there's part of the day where they take children, rearrange them based on their learning level rather than their age. And this is, this has been, people have also used, done this using computers. So you have computers adjusting to the level of the child automatically, but as we've heard from Imran, that can be quite challenging when people don't have access to that technology. So let me go on. I think there's one last slide. Nope, that was the last slide. Okay, so I think this, I've dug into one specific area, but as I say, I think there's other things in the report that can pick up on and address some of the other issues, Imran, that you raised. So I'm happy to come back to that in questions. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. I should have introduced Rachel. So Rachel Granster is the Chief Economist at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and she's also a member of the FCDO Executive Committee. She was also the Executive Director, past Executive Director of JPAL. Great. So we're running a bit late, but let's, I think this was really important to sort of listen. So let's now move to, some of the discussions we have today. So I wanted to start off, and we have, as I said, we have got a really good, rich group of people to hear from. And so I'd like to start off with Dr. Rukmini Banerjee. Just to introduce Rukmini, she is the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation. And anybody working on education, I think knows about Pratham quite well. So Rukmini, of course, you reflect on, the whole thing and whatever you want to pick up, but I would be really interested in hearing from you. Of course, you'll talk about TARL and all that, but if you can really think about how do we globalize and scale something like the TARL approach, and what has been your experience of scaling such an approach, especially through sort of government policy? I think that would be where I would really like you to perhaps reflect and tell us a bit more from your experience. Over to you, Rukmini.
Thank you so much, Imran Bhai. It's always a pleasure to be on I've never been to Bangladesh, always wanted to come. So now at least virtually I'm there. Couple of things. I really liked the fact of your title of your session called Deepening, just so that we don't forget that we had some problems before and now they may potentially be worse. But understanding the contours of the problem before, I think is really important. So in addition to what you said and Rachel said, I just wanted to highlight just a couple of things about the learning crisis as we saw it, let's say up to March 2020. So learning levels are low. Your numbers are pretty similar to the India numbers, that almost half the children, even after 5 years of being in school, are still struggling with some basic reading and in our case in arithmetic as well. I think this low level we have been seeing in India for the last 15 years. And so it is really a big stuck. Unsticking from this is going to be, even in pre-COVID times, a big challenge. And I think we should keep that in mind. The second is that in India, if we look at our data over time and our USSR data, which I will refer to a little bit later as well, gives us a whole 15-year trend of these basic reading and math levels by district, by state, for very large cohorts of children. We in fact saw a decline in that well before COVID. From 2010 to 2015, we see it, and that kind of a decline is visible not just in the USSR data, but also in several other studies that have been done in India. Young Lives has longitudinal studies, even the government's own data shows that. So I wanted to point out that there have been periods when other things were so-called normal that we've seen declines. And then, of course, there are two things, Asif Bhai and me and Karthik were on a call not long ago, where Karthik says it in one way and I say it another way. But basically what we are saying is, in any given class, in any given grade, there is a lot of variation in learning levels, even pre-COVID. So for example, if I take standard 3 in India, we see from our USSR data that only about 25% on average are at grade level and others are well below. And then Karthik studies show that as you go up the elementary school grades, often majority of children are at least 3 to 4 grade levels behind. This is pre, right? And the last point that I want to say, at least again using USSR data from India, is that we have huge variation within the country. Although our curriculum framework is the same, we have states like Himachal, like Kerala, like Punjab, who have more than half the children at grade level in standard 3, and a good chunk just close behind. And then we have very large states at the end of the distribution where less than maybe 10, 15% are at grade level, and a very large section of children are way behind. Now, the reason I say the way behind is that when you have a loss, you have to fall below a certain level. But if you're pretty low, there is not that much room to fall. So then along comes COVID, and we don't know. Last year at this time, we were all pretending it was the summer holidays and we would get back to school after that. But that golden moment is not here. And, I think we have to be ready for the fact that, at least in India, we are talking about the fact that you have to be ready for several scenarios to be on again and off again at all times. And therefore, any strategy that we come up with should take into consideration that some connect to home, some connect to mohalla or pada or whatever is the relevant hamlet activity. something that can happen at village level, and then of course when schools open. And this basically corresponds to complete lockdown when you can't do any, no movement is possible, only remote. We've seen a lot of, and I think you have in Bangladesh as well, that at this mohalla pada level, things are often possible in small ways, in small groups. And going back to what Rachel said, that our teaching at the right level, which even in India we have used very flexibly in different situations, we have seen across every RCT that JPAL has done a significant volunteer effect. And I think that is an important thing to highlight in this COVID time, that volunteer, youth volunteer, neighbor, sibling, working in small groups, even in our evaluations prior to COVID has shown significant and positive results. And so while we do think that structured learning in schools is a good idea, but there's enough evidence to show that effort of that type can be quite positive as well. So I wanted to I have a few slides, Imran Bhai, if you permit me, just using data that we had. And I also would love to hear comments from the others on it. And this is what I'm calling seize the moment, because there were things that we needed to do before, things that, let us say, all these learning levels and people being below grade level is really not the fault of the children. It's the fault of how we structure our age grade curriculums, at least in India, and I think in other parts of the world. I think those needed change. It's difficult to change when you're on a treadmill, but now we have a punctuation mark, and therefore, how do we think about this? So I want to just show you a couple of slides based on the data that we have. If we just go to the next slide. So we have about, 15 years of data. I'm not using all 15. If we just move to the next slide, basically what we've done is we've looked at how much learning gain has there been in a normal year. And we've taken years from 2012 to 2018. This slide looks a bit complicated. I just want to explain. On the right-hand side, we have a sample of a simple reading paragraph, which is a grade level 2 in India. And the children read this in, whatever their language is. So we have it in Bangla, in Marathi, and everything. And what I've plotted on the top graph is really year-on-year, the percentage of children who are able to read this second grade level. And the example I'm bringing is from UP, which is one of our biggest states, and among the more educationally, behind. So you see and if you look at the different colors, these are just following the same cohort through a couple of years. And basically what we see for UP is that depending on the cohort, depending on the grade, depending on the year, there is anywhere between a 5 to 10 percentage point increase in the ability of children to read simple text in a normal time, so-called normal time. And as you go slightly with older children, that is a little bit higher. It's a little bit maybe from 10 to 15 percentage points. So this is our normal trajectory for learning in a normal year. Go to the next slide. I wanted to show you that in the 2018 school year, Pratham was able to work with the government of UP. It's the largest state, 120 or 30,000 primary government schools. And there what we did is, I think you'll have to just click for the text to come. There what we did is basically the children were grouped by their level and for grades 3 to 5. And we saw that in a period of, you'll have to just keep clicking, you'll get the numbers out there. Basically the point here is that in a period of about 60 to 70 days, with maybe 2 hours a day, you could see a learning gain of the type that you see in a normal annual year. This is a large school system with all its issues about whether teachers would implement or not, etc., etc. Now, the reason I'm showing you this example is that the point here, and I think this point has been reinforced by some previous RCTs that JPAL has done, is when the focus is to build foundational learning, basic reading and arithmetic, and the system is aligned from top to bottom to do this. Curriculum is put aside for a couple of hours a day or a couple of days in the month or whatever it may be, you can actually see big gains in a short period of time. And so what my hope is, and I have one more slide to show you that what I'm saying is not just from UP, but from teaching at the right level. And Imran Bhai, this is to your point, how can you convince governments to do it? The next slide shows you from recent years whenever Pratham has been able to work with large state governments, we are seeing something like 20, 25 percentage points improvement in basic reading in 2, 3, 4 months time. So there's a slide for that, but we don't need to see it. That's the main point that I was trying to make. So putting this all together, when we come back, and actually I really like here are all the numbers, lots of numbers, but basic point is focus, align your system, set a goal that parents and teachers can understand, and you're able to see quite promising, positive, significant gains. And this is all the teaching at the right level stuff is backed by all this RCT evidence. And Rachel, just to your point, that in every state when you do it, it actually gets modified quite a bit based on what the state government feels and so on. The essential core elements are the same, but the way it plays out is varied. So we can take the slides away. I want to say that I really like the way you put it, Imran Bhai, build forward better. I would like to push everyone to say, leap forward. Don't even say come back and build back and all that. I think look forward, leap forward. And the way we are looking at it to say is that we are very confident that if you have a clear goal, all children reading basic, if you say this to parents, to panchayats, to everyone, I think at this point, the motivation to do something very focused for children is very high. We were running some of our local Mohalla volunteer classes in April, and the classes were supposed to start at 9. Children would come to the volunteers' house at 6 o'clock and say, Dada, get up. I want to start. I want to get going. I think children are keen, parents are keen, everybody is looking. So national campaigns to say, not just catch up, leap forward with simple things like Golpo Podo, Onko Koro, simple things that we want to achieve, and not wait for a moment. The way we are looking at it is to say, send messages home. SMS messages home also work. But follow that up with some kind of a mohalla activity. Appeal. We are, in fact, I've been floating this idea. I don't know whether anybody's listening or not. We have this National Employment Guarantee Scheme. Why not, for this COVID period, allow instructional activity in the village to be part of this Narega scheme, because we are going to need all of this. And of course, when schools are open, then you can do this in a more structured way, but don't wait for that moment for schools to open. So I would say that if in South Asia, across our subcontinent, if we say we are going to leap forward, we may get far ahead of where we were in March 2020, and we are going to have to put curriculum aside. This is my last point. I'll stop talking. I mean, think about children who are enrolled in 2nd standard today, literally, ora maar kol theke uthe school ashbe. They have not been to school. They're coming, Rachel, literally from their mother's laps into 2nd standard. You're not going to use your 2nd standard textbooks for such children. You're going to have to do a lot of readiness activities and things to get ready. Similarly, children who are today in 5th standard actually have had no 4th and an indifferent 3rd. So the curriculum that we were all struggling with needs to be put aside. Anyway, we need positive gains. We need low-hanging fruit. And for the world, if India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal get together and do this, it will be far ahead of the curve, and we will lead the world in years to come. I will stop.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rukmini, for that very, kind of inspirational way of thinking about this crisis and also an opportunity, so that's really great. Just to sort of pick up, I think the importance of longitudinal evidence, I think that's really important. And I think that's something you talked about. The importance of agile local sort of solution that sort of integrate with central solution, I think is really, really important. Something you talked about. Very interesting. You talked about volunteerism, and I think this is sort of something that I think is really interesting, and perhaps the importance of more community-based, volunteerism-oriented sort of approach involving the educated youth and so on and so forth, because I think there could be big opportunities and innovations there, and I'll come back to some of those. Maybe Asif can reflect on some of those. But the sort of the other point that very important point is really around how do you align your system, and then you talked about there has to be, perhaps there's some platform program, some flagship. You talked about your national guarantee, rural employment guarantee scheme, and India has got this really large scale national platforms on which you can actually piggyback and sort of kind of maybe take things forward. And I think that's something. What is the equivalent of that in the Bangladesh context? Is there that type of a national program platform that is that I think would be really important to basically think about? But I'm sure Zilur will reflect on some of those towards the end. Let me now bring in Susanna. So let me just introduce Susanna Harris. Susanna is a senior policy fellow and co-director of Center for Global Development's Global Education Program. So Susanna, would like to, for you to, give your remarks, maybe try and keep it within 5 to 6 minutes if you can. But, you're free to speak on any of the topics, but, I would like to, kind of maybe ask you to, comment a bit around, because we are really focused on learning outcome, but how do we think about learning outcome in a more broad way, but also thinking about more non-educational pathways and determinants that we need to actually think about if we really want learning outcome to be really effective and lasting. So especially with the focus on gender, I know that's the area of work you do. But Susanna, over to you.
Thanks so much, Imran, and thanks for inviting me today. I think that inspiration from Rukmini gives me quite a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I did have a few slides prepared, but I think given that we're running a bit short of time, I'll just make the 3 or 4 points that I wanted to make without them. I wanted to talk about a couple of policy considerations that, as Imran just said, I think are important for learning, but also important in their own right, and quite relevant to the trigger questions you posed to us about catch-up, dropout, and reducing inequality. So firstly, thinking about dropout, the total schooling that children are expected to attain in the absence of the COVID pandemic, of course, varies very widely, from more than 13 years in many high-income countries like the UK, US, to less than 5 years in some low-income countries. And so when we consider the percentage of lifetime education disrupted by the pandemic, we see that children in some countries, Ethiopia and South Sudan, for example, have missed out on more than 1/6 of all the schooling they might expect to get over their lifetime. And of course, Bangladesh has been badly affected too. So it's important that children in every country come back. But in these countries where children have quite limited education anyway, it's even more important that they come back. We have seen some early positive signs. For example, in Sierra Leone, an RCT run by my colleagues Justin Sandifer, Dave Evans, and I suggest that more than 99% have returned. But anecdotes and emerging evidence suggest that that's not the case everywhere. So first of all, making sure that they come back. Then secondly, thinking about non-educational interventions, one good way to bring children back is to restore school meals. More than 300 million children were receiving school meals before the pandemic. UNICEF estimates that about 40% have been missing those meals during the pandemic. We have numerous studies that show that school feeding has a positive impact on school enrollment and retention, especially for girls, and also that food facilitates learning, although there is a fair amount of variance as to which ages are most affected. I think possibly more importantly, governments are actually very good at supplying school meals. There's evidence from India to Mozambique, which suggests that even weak states, sometimes with the help of aid donors, can successfully deliver meals to millions of kids. It was Abhijit Singh who talked about the midday meals in India, which reached about 120 million children every day. And he says they're probably the most successful of all interventions that the Indian state has delivered in the past decades. And school meals also scale well. We all know that the track record of many policies is quite mixed when it's taken to scale by governments. And one reason that many programs fail to scale successfully is that they require highly skilled staff to implement who can be scarce. But other programs are more robust to low state implementation capacity, primarily logistical tasks with limited discretion from staff required. And our analysis suggests that the effects of a massive scale school meals program in India with more than 15,000 schools is about the same as a much smaller school meals study with less than 100 schools. So the effect size in this case is quite small, but it's consistent. Other programs, the effect size declines sharply with scale. So that consistency is quite important. Then my third point, a quick point on exams. This has been one of the trickiest questions for policymakers during COVID-19, what to do about exams. Many countries cancelled or postponed them, and others pressed on. And some work that's in progress by my colleagues in Colombia, we can see that the gap between rich and poor in terms of exam performance is widening even further. So only about 20% of the poorest students scored the benchmark in the high school leaving exam last year, compared with 30% pre-COVID. And we see that at the other end of the distribution, sort of richer children are pulling towards the 2019 line, while poorer children are slipping away. So I think the COVID-19 shutdown is really drawing attention to the role of high stakes exams and triggering discussion about whether or not they're a fair way of filtering children with very different early life experience into the next phase of education. These school closures are, of course, exceptional, or we hope they're exceptional, but wealth-based inequality disadvantages children and their performance in exams every year. And then finally, my fourth point, just something about safety in school, something that I've been talking to Imran and his team at length about recently. Our analysis of PISA-D data suggests that 1 in 8 boys and girls in Senegal and Zambia report having been sexually harassed by a teacher within the last 4 weeks. That's pretty shocking to me, and it's not a problem that's just in those two countries, it's widespread. As we go back post-COVID, we need to know much more about how to keep children safe, and we need to do much more to keep them safe. And I would argue that our efforts to get more girls and boys in school and learning more will be worth little if we can't give them a safe place to learn when they're there. I'll stop there. Thanks, Imran.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susanna. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those. I think the school meal is extremely important one, especially in a kind of a economic shock context where there's a declining economic situation for many households, and recovery is still slow, and it's off and on, economic starting and restarting and closing, in that type of a context. I think school meal may actually, take on a very important role. Great. Now let's move to Asif. Over to you. I mean, again, Asif Saleh is the executive director of BRAC Bangladesh. Now, Asif, question to you. Obviously, it's going to be more on BRAC, but also if you could perhaps reflect on the sort of wider, how do we get government perhaps to take some of the innovations that is happening in the NGO space to be sort of taken as a part of sort of policy. So I think that would be really, really interesting if you have any thoughts in terms of, from innovation linkage from government, from NGOs to government.
Thank you, Imran, and great to be in this panel. And every time I listen to Rukmini, I feel like going up and shouting for education and getting and jumping. It's so inspiring. Rukmini, fantastic points. I just want to kind of take up, before I get to your point, Imran, very quickly on the government engagement, just to get to a point. I mean, one point Rukmini made, and we are facing similar situation, that schools are closed almost 15 months, and they are not in any way. People are hoping, or policymakers are hoping, that there will be this one golden moment where everything is going to be fine, and then school will be open at that time. And that golden moment is not coming, and it's unlikely to come in the next couple of years until the full vaccination is done. And the rate the government is going, and this is going to take at least 2 years for us. So that means that, are we thinking that for the next 2 years, this is going to be the case? And imagine what's going to be the case. So I think the first point of advocacy for all of us is that coming to that realization that there will be some risks, but there will be also policy making has to be a bit more nuanced, rather than saying that until everything infection rate comes down nationally under 5%, we're not going to open schools. Because there was a window of opportunity in last year when infections were mostly in Dhaka and Chittagong, and rest of the rural areas, schools could have been opened very clearly. And again, in the coming days, there will be situations like that where you need to look at on a local by local area basis and be able to reopen schools safely. So that's step one, and that we all need to advocate for safe school reopening, because some level of engagement in the school premise has to start. Then the next thing is around reopening and then getting the children back to school. Now the children, apologies, I have a small children. Okay, all right. So the second thing is around obviously around getting children back to school, and again that would require a situation where just simple motivation is not going to work. And here I echo what Susanna said, that we are operating at a context where one of our recent studies have showed, and Imran, you have done some studies. Sorry, you have done some studies which showed that there has been significant decline in people's economic conditions. So, for example, 77% of families have reported that their income has gone down. So, at this situation where family members are going out and trying to make ends meet, it's motivation plus economic incentives both needs to come together. So, the issue of providing incentives to get children back to school and increasing the sort of the cash transfer is going to be a very important part of kind of bringing them back. And here, from equity perspective, girls were losing, we are losing them more and more in child marriage. Increasingly, that's again that there needs to be higher sort of incentive for that. Now, then coming after they come back to school, then the issue of these models that we have talked about. And BRAC has done some interesting study in models in the last few months, because we were operating under the impression that we're looking at probably a 4 to 6 month period of this school closure. And then, but the idea was that how do we ensure the learning loss is reduced as much as possible, and getting children involved in some way, in some level of economic activity. So, and we operate mostly in areas where there are no internet, low tech, remote areas for schools. So we mostly dependent on low tech interventions like community radio, feature phone, and conference calling for students by the teacher in a feature phone and having a 20-minute conversation with them. So that was one effort. But the other kind of more fundamental shift has been what you were referring to, which is, and also Rukmini referred to that, moving from a teacher-centric model to a model where
perhaps it's electricity failure. Let's see. Anirbhai has joined. Great, thank you, Anirbhai. Maybe we can bring in Asif later. Let's move on to our next speaker, and then hopefully Asif will come back. So let me invite now.
It looks like Asif is back.
Asif, are you back? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
you. I could hear you. So sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So sorry. I was just gonna. I don't know how much you said that. Where I was saying that the moving from a teacher-centric model to a model where student is at the center, and then you're bringing in other players by forming a small learning group. So it's homeschooling, but at the same time a clustered learning group where others within the community, because we are forming this group based on their residences and their geographic proximity of the residences. So likelihood is the 4 households within a same community coming together. Their parents are involved, and some level of these local sort of educated young people also coming together. And there's more of a whole of society approach in kind of helping the students to learn in the absence of a kind of a school-based model. So that's working out pretty well in complementarity to what we were doing through community radio and also these 20-minute conversation on a weekly basis with the teacher. Now we are moving from there and introducing the element of teacher actually visiting the student's house. So this is possible for us because we are non-formal schools, and every school has 1 teacher and 30 children. So this is one of the low-cost models that BRAC pioneered everywhere. But then then what do we do for like bigger public schools as well? So I think there are lessons to be learned from here, and I think that's where we are continuously trying to work with the government. And I think we are now in the phase where looking at first in terms of reopening and looking at how to kind of get students back to school. So that's the first step, but we're also starting to engage in some level. But it's not always easy, as Rukmini knows. But we are continuing our effort. But I think we'd love to hear from Anir more on this. Thank you, Imran.
Thank you, Asif. I think your this fundamental point that it's not an on and off switch. I think if we sort of wait for that on switch to sort of flicker, and then it's not an on off switch. So we need to really think about more agile models. And maybe one question that perhaps I'll bring in Rashida right now to really reflect on. I think there's some questions here as well, because inspired by Rukmini, people are basically talking about this more community-based approaches. Asif talked about safe school reopening, but in a different format, different way. Is that Rashida, a question to you? Do you think those type of models? Can we rely on the sort of state-based approach on those, or does it have to be, kind of a different type of campaign with civil society actors and whole of community society approach in terms of moving that forward? So Rashida, over to you.
Oh,
sorry, let me introduce Rashida. So Rashida Chaudhary is the executive director at Campaign for Popular Education, Campaign. She has also been the advisor for primary and mass education in the government of Bangladesh. Rashida, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks to BIGD and PPRC, because it's always very rewarding to listen to anything that BIDG organizes, all this research and everything. And I'm so proud of it, because BRAC and BIGD and PPRC all are our partners, because I represent a network that has all those partners. It's such a wonderful network. But it's not only policy, research, and intervention, but I suppose we also need campaigns to do this. And this is where your question comes in. And this is where our role is. Because we have the heart of things. Now, we have all those pockets of success stories, models that Asif was talking about. There are others who have joined with BRAC in developing those models, particularly during this learning crisis situation. And about this crisis that was already there, the learning crisis, the quality in education. As the UN Secretary General has so aptly mentioned it on 4th August 2020, he said, we are going from crisis to catastrophe. And that is it, the whole learning crisis situation. But about evidence to action, what you have asked me, we have all this research and models. Big question is, how do we deliver? Particularly catch-up education, how to ensure quality, how do we bring children back to school? So where do we stand at this moment? Thanks to Rachel, I should have thanked her for sharing such a thought-provoking framework for recovering learning losses, because we need to think about all those frameworks. It may not fit, one size may not fit all, but we'll adapt all this framework, and that's already inbuilt in Rachel's framework. Now, for me, we now have credible data, lots of evidence. We have a wonderful framework. We need to gather ourselves. That's what your question is about. Raise our voices and draw our attention, draw the attention of policymakers. Asif has already raised this question. Well, Rukmini has already given us the point that seize the moment. And that's what is so important. One request to all the wonderful researchers here. To me, evidence, of course, has to be scientific and credible, but it has to be user-friendly, even for decision makers. We need to ask ourselves whether all the evidence that we are presenting everywhere, is it user-friendly? Then the second one, my point will be, it has to be in a language to catch the attention of implementers, teachers. I could see a lack of focus on teachers everywhere, because they are the ones who will be implementing whatever we are desiring to happen. And the education administration, all our language, be it in implementation, be it in research or evidence creation, has to be, user-friendly and in a language. Because finally, at the end of the day, the government has to be in the driving seat. We could be co-helpers. We could be passengers, but we definitely want our government to drive us to our destination safely and to achieve our goals. The third one, national motivation campaigns, as Rukmini has pointed out, the Mohalla activity, and we already have models from BRAC. It's not only non-formal primary education, but may I also draw your attention to the fact that all these civil society voices and everything that we are talking about, there is a continuing deficit or decrease of civil society's space, democratic space. We have to think about that as a more challenge. Even, I don't know whether all the NGOs have got that notification from the decision makers, the Director General of Primary Education, banning all sorts of even education related activities, not only education programs, but শিক্ষা সংক্রান্ত কোনো কার্যক্রম কোনো NGO করিতে পারিবে না. What do you mean by this শিক্ষা সংক্রান্ত education? What we are doing for all this Mohalla activity was BRAC has been trying to motivate so that kids don't get out, so that they don't drop out or getting married off by their parents. So these are Mohalla activities that we are trying to motivate parents, kids. These are শিক্ষা সংক্রান্ত কার্যক্রম. But then our challenge is to make the decision makers understand the learning loss, the time that we are losing. So maybe my fourth point to all of you will be, maybe time has come for all of us, particularly for researchers, to go for an economic cost of, to identify the economic cost of losing education. Because here the government is looking at the economic cost. Very simple framework, life and living, livelihood, all these industries, they are facing problems. But how about the learning loss that is happening? Where is the economic cost of that? Maybe we should challenge ourselves as evidence generators to go for identifying the economic cost of losing this. So my final point, okay, fine, evidence to action. Maybe at one point of time, we may even have to think of going for litigation. As campaigners, I am very much interested in challenging the decision makers even, because we did it 5 years back. I was the petitioner when the schools were charging more fees than those provided by the government ceiling. And we went to the court. I was the petitioner, challenging those systems. And 67 schools, secondary schools of Dhaka city mainstream, they had to return back the money that they got. So maybe we as campaigners, we can join you, but we also should be thinking of different mechanisms, different processes, different approaches. So thank you so much. This is from a campaigner. All my life I've been campaigning, but on the basis of your evidence.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashilapa. I think you brought out some very sobering points, ones that we need to really think about, reflect on, and hopefully, I don't think we'll be having time, or this requires quite more substantive conversation to really unpack and understand. But hopefully, maybe towards the end, this is one of the topics that we may want to kind of pick up to really unpack, understand, and see, how we can, kind of contribute to this challenge that we are facing in the policy environment. Because maybe there is unless we get the policy environment conducive to innovation, it's going to be really difficult and that's exactly where we need to move from a resilience-based approach to a anti-fragile approach. And that is the whole point, because the whole resilient-based approach is this off and on approach. That's not going to work in this context, given the crisis. So I think there's a whole, how do we work together to make that transition happen, and how do we, have those conversations is going to be the critical point. Great. Hopefully we'll come back towards the end. Now, I'm very aware that we said we'll finish by 2, which obviously we can't. So we will have to extend it by another half an hour. So, apologies to everyone, but I think this is a very important conversation we're having. So I hope you'll, excuse the, additional half an hour. Let me now bring in Anir Chaudhary. So Anir Chaudhary is the policy advisor of the A2I, which is called Aspire to Innovate program of the ICT division and the cabinet division of the government of Bangladesh, supported by UNDP. So Anir bhai, you are free to kind of reflect on any of the topics, but try and keep it within 5 minutes if you can, maybe 7 minutes. But obviously, the main question to you is going to be really around EdTech and remote learning, and what's your view on that? How do we really take this forward in a way that actually is meaningful, for our context? Anir bhai, over to you.
Thank you very much. Imran bhai, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. And apologies that I'm late. I was in fact talking about this exact topic with the Honorable Education Minister and the Deputy Minister and the officials in the ministry, talking about how blended learning, which is a blend of physical environment and the digital environment, how that facilitates learning. What has happened that we all know, and we have 2 distinguished panelists here who actually steered education in the Ministry of Primary and Mass Education as an advisor, so Rashida Chaudhary, Apa, and Dr. Hossein Zillur Rahman, who steered education in the Ministry of Education. So they understand the context of the government and how to steer it from that perspective. So what we have seen between 2019 and 2020 is education became from all physical, or almost all physical, to all digital overnight. So in middle of March, we saw physical education last year, 2020, and end of March, within about 2 weeks, it became all TV and internet based all of a sudden. So the shock to the system that that education stakeholders actually found themselves in, the teachers, the parents, and obviously the students and the education administration. So going from one paradigm to the other almost overnight was I would really see this as a shock to the system. Even in that, I mean, I read the study or the studies, I read the summary of that. So I'm very grateful that these studies have tried to understand to an extent the effectiveness of the so-called digital education that we tried to bring in the pandemic, during the pandemic, and who has tried what and how they have really facilitated learning. So what we have tried over TV by repurposing the parliamentary TV as education TV, what we have tried with community radios, what BRAC has tried, many other NGOs have tried, what we have tried with feature phones. BRAC has done seminal work on that in terms of using feature phones that are in the hands of teachers and students. And what we have tried over the internet with a combination of government efforts. A lot of startup companies have actually piped in a lot of content over the internet. A lot of non-government actors have actually done content development, and it's a combination of things that has really happened. So going forward, what does this really mean? And as Imran bhai asked me to talk more about EdTech, but I think we really need to couch EdTech in the context of education, not in the context of technology. So in ed tech, ed is the driving component and tech is the supporting component, and that's the way we should look at it. If we look at it the other way, if we make it technology driven, then it's just not going to work. So recently I was in a webinar with EdTech Hub in the UK, and one comment that really struck me was the best technology is the technology that we have in our hands. So what do we have in our hands? Obviously, the studies have shown that we don't have internet in our hands. Most students don't have internet in their hands. And even if they do, it's expensive. So they don't always have it in their hands. So if we talk about internet-based education, multiple hours a day at a high speed, the cost of that internet is actually prohibitively expensive for most students, if not almost all students. I mean, we're really talking about a few urban elite households that can afford that kind of internet access. In most of the country, that internet access is actually not available at all. So when you talk about internet availability, accessibility, and affordability, those 3 A's that are attached to internet, I think in many cases, affordability is low. In many cases, accessibility is low, and in other cases, availability is also low. So those 3 A's are missing when we're talking about internet driven education. Now, if we talk about TV, it's not interactive, right? It's one way. If we talk about radio, again, it's one way. If we talk about feature phones, that could be interactive, but again, it lacks the sights and the visuals. So it's a very limited mode of interaction. However, if we can combine all of these together, if we can combine the high tech, which is where the internet plays a role, the low tech, which is where radio, TV, and feature phones play a role, and the no tech, which is where the assignments that were given out at the end of last year and newspapers play a role. And if we can actually connect the dots, then we can have a meaningful EdTech paradigm for not only during COVID, but actually post-pandemic situation as well. So this blended learning, combining high tech, low tech, and no tech, will have to serve us in the future, not just during the pandemic, but it should be a permanent structure within the education paradigm. And as Rashid Hapa has correctly mentioned, it's really the government in the driving seat. And we expect the government to be the driving seat. That's exactly the conversation I was just having, and that's why I got delayed. It was supposed to be a 1 hour conversation, became almost a 3 hour conversation with the education policymakers. So the issue of this multimodal, high tech, low tech, and no tech delivery mechanism, I think is what we're trying to design for the future by connecting dots that already exist, dots where we have seen excellence from the government, from the NGOs, from the EdTech startup companies, from the telcos, from the development partners. I think all of those good practices have to be combined to give a coherent picture of this multimodal EdTech education delivery. The role of teachers and the role of parents have also changed. Teachers were used to doing lectures in classrooms. Now they do lectures on TV or on Facebook or through radio or through phones. They call up the students and actually find that they're checking up on students, again, with guidance from the education administrators. So they have become the role that they have started taking the role that we always talked about for teachers as facilitators, not as lecturers. I think that is happening, and it's happening without design. It's happening because the pandemic, the crisis necessitates that. So I think if we can again bring that into design, the role of teachers going forward in the education paradigm, where they are facilitators of learning and not just dictators of learning, I think that will serve us well in the future. The role of parents, even if the parents are not literate, they have a role now, right? And Rashid Abba talked about campaign. Have we done enough campaign to the parents to let them know what role they have in this lockdown? I don't think we have done that enough. have we told them enough what role they have in the TV-based education? What role they have in actually finding education materials in the newspapers, and how to blend all of them together? Again, this is for parents who can read and write and are somewhat educated. But whatever for the parents who are illiterate and are in the same role as education guides, right? Because teachers are not in the physical scene, right? Parents are, caregivers are, older siblings are. So what is the message to them that they can play an effective role in this home-based learning system? I think that's something that we need to really think about. We have not done a deep enough thinking on that, I think. And that is also part of EdTech. EdTech is not technology, as I said. EdTech is education. And technology, high, low, no tech technology will have to actually play a role, and the parents will have to play a role there. I'll end with 5 pillars of a blended learning framework that I proposed today. It has teaching learning practice. It has content and resources. It has assessment that goes from summative to formative more and more in the future. It has teacher capacity development, and it has an inclusive infrastructure. And in these 5 pillars, I think we have done most work in content and resources. Essentially, we have developed a lot of educational content in technology, but we have not done a good enough job in blending that content in the teaching learning practice. We have not done a good enough job in terms of coming up with better assessment frameworks that we need for 21st century skills that we talk about. We have not done a good enough job of telling the teachers what role they have. Teachers are sort of figuring that out on their own. So they're fending for themselves. What is their role in this whole paradigm? And we have not done enough to provide inclusive infrastructure. So we provide stipends to all primary school children. We provide stipends to a large number of secondary school children as well. Can connectivity be part of that stipend program? We subsidize connectivity, we subsidize devices in a clever way, in a strategic way that will serve the needs of our children. So those are the things that we discussed today. So the combination of the teaching learning practice, blending the content and resources, changing the assessment framework, developing the teacher's capacity to support in this new blended learning model, and then creating an inclusive infrastructure so that the blended learning can actually reach the students that have not been reached. And the studies actually have shown that EdTech has not reached most students in an effective way. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Anirudh. And I think that was a really useful way to think about, especially the EdTech, the whole multimodal model that you provided a framework for thinking, and I think this is very useful. And I'm sure we, towards the end, Zailur may want to reflect on that. But before I hand over to Zailur, I just wanted to give Rachel a chance, because she's been hearing, and we heard her give a keynote, or a trigger presentation. But Rachel, do you have any reflection before I hand over to Zailur? Rachel, you're on mute. It's the slogan of the time.
I know. I clicked, but it didn't pick up. Anyway, I just wanted to reflect on one of the things which, one of the questions that came up that was in the Q&A about, we've got all these different models, and sort of a sense of, we've got all these different models, and so kind of where do we go? And I would just stress that my point in my talk about cost effectiveness, which is we do have lots of different models, and we do have a lot of different models that work, but it is just going to be, unfortunately, a very constrained environment that fiscally the country's going to be in, including Bangladesh. And while this is a huge, the learning loss that we're talking about is going to be a huge loss to productivity, which will have, monetary implications to the country going forward. we still have to do, some quite tight prioritizing. So, I love the enthusiasm and lots of different models, but some are better than others. So, and so we really need to take into account cost when we think about these different models. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rachel. I think that whole point about taking cost into account in any determination of priority, I think, is really important. And I think this is a big I think point for all of us who are more involved in the whole evidence world. Many of the times we're really focused on kind of really doing rigorous evaluation without really without also taking cost very, very seriously. And I think that's really, really important, the whole cost effectiveness dimension. So thanks for reminding that in terms of determining the smart buys and prioritizing there. Great. So I think now I, would like to invite Hussain Zillur Rahman to, kind of try and conclude and help us move forward, Zillur Bhai. So just to introduce, Dr. Hussain Zillur Rahman is the founder and executive chairman at Power and Participation Research Center. He's also the chair of the BRAC Bangladesh board. Zillur Bhai, over to you.
Thank you, Imran. And it has been a fascinating 1.5 hours or nearly 2 hours. First of all, I also want to reciprocate that with Imran that the partnership between PPRC and BIGD was also forged as a COVID response. As researchers, we felt that pulling together really worked well for us to pursue areas of our own interest, and the partnership really has yielded. Today is one webinar. A week ago, we had another one on urban social protection, which is also very, very instructive. I think I won't go the path of doing a conventional summary. Actually, that's not the point. And I think Imran's request is more in terms of trying to think of way forward. And if I look at that, I mean, there are 3 levels on which we need to really think about. One is the household level. I think a lot of it has come, the community and the household level. That's one level in which our thinking process has to really focus on. The other is the school. And the third is the state. I mean, I think all these have come through within the discussion, both trigger presentation as well as the panelist discussion. And the concerns actually, which is driving our attempt to find a way forward, what Imran has said, build forward better. We are seeing certain concerns specific to COVID response. I mean, as everyone, as Rukmini and Imran both have identified, that we were already in a difficult starting point, but I think COVID has aggravated and has added some new elements to it. One is a motivational loss, retention loss, inequality, women facing, more difficult situation, and the fear of permanent dropouts. So multiple concern areas have emerged. I feel that, and both Rashida has underscored the importance of what she mentioned is civil society space shrinking, government this instruction, and Anir also mentioned about other types of discussion which is going on within the domain of the state, so to say. And I think for all of us, one conceptual new way of posing the issue has become imperative, I find. We have to delink the issues in front of us. One is the educational life of children, and the other is the school issue. The two needs to be delinked. They are integrated, of course, central. We have been trained to think about educational life is about school life. But I think COVID is telling us we need to, even in terms of getting back on the school agenda itself, we need to delink these two, because there is action space which is beyond school. Everyone has pointed about the community space. So if we delink this to, and I think for the government also, then it becomes a more important point to understand, because government obviously is concerned on the infection spread also, and therefore they are extra cautious, let's say, on the issue of safe reopening. Now, the safe reopening agenda should not halt action on the educational life agenda. That is a big point that we need to all make, because that opens a space for the government to become active without giving into the idea that we are playing into, we are not addressing the issue of safe reopening. I think this is very, very critical. If we make that initial point, we have a new space opened up on which I think government also can begin to get engaged. We can get, Rashida can begin to engage her counterparts in the government system, and we শিক্ষা সংক্রান্ত যে বিষয়গুলো, and we will make sure that that is not affecting the infection fear, because obviously, as Imran and PPRC BIGD study has shown, school closure has not meant a complete stoppage of the educational life, because that has continued in other forms. So that, I think, is a very important initial point. And the second one, initial point I would make is that, yes, there are, as I think Rukmini or Susanna or Imran and others have mentioned, there are, of course, education as a whole. We have concerns as a whole about quality issues, access issues, etc. But I would, for this purpose of this discussion and for getting the government engaged in a more proactive manner, I would make another distinction, which is that, yes, the discussion about improving education as a pre-existing, pre-COVID agenda must continue. All the point about, teaching at the right level, etc., and all those are also critical. But I think we also need to, in a way, narrow down the COVID-specific action space, because that then also gives us a handle in terms of trying to identify actions which are addressing the immediate reality, and COVID response action space, identifying that in its own right, beyond the issue of the pre-existing education improvement agenda. That is also very important, because through that we can again open up. So these two initial way of looking at the issue, framing the issue, I think this is critical. And I think from this discussion, that's what I take, that we need a way of this framing challenge is the first challenge we need to really address. Once we have done that, I find 4 entry points on which to act upon. One is the community. This is the educational life part of it, not the school life part of it, the community space. And I think Asif gave some examples there, and others may have, I'm sure in India and other places. I think the community, the catch-up agenda has also to be delinked from school and from grades. That is more properly packaged and acted upon within that community space. I think the catch-up agenda is a critical agenda, but we need to really delink it from the grades issue, also from the school issue. And I think that has been actually a mental block for the government also. Even a BRAC project, actually, I was suggesting to them, and it seemed to have worked, that they were all, there was a project about, school support, etc., education support, but it all got caught, when will the safe reopening be done? And therefore, it's like, when that will happen, golden moment was mentioned. We don't need to wait for a golden moment. We can get started right now, provided we do this right framing. I think community space is offering, and that's a whole new area of innovations also. I think Anir did a wonderful articulation of this blended learning possibilities. And certainly ad tech is to be driven by ad, not the tech part of it. But in the contextualized solutions that we need to look for. So I think, and the community level space is catch up is one part of it. But also, I think there is a serious problem of motivation loss. Imran identified at the very outset. We talked to the guardians that they mentioned both at their own level, but at the student level. We have actually a social behavior is not been discussed much, has really spread among the younger groups. The motivation loss on education has to be reversed. That's a priority. That is not necessarily ironclad dependent on the opening of the schools. We can get started at the community level through interesting programs. And Rashida's campaign and all that can also do. But I also see great few other areas of innovation. One is blended learning, the technology that Anir has said. I think that's we really need to build on that. The other is that we can also mobilize newer type of actors, community level actors, mothers, or community type workers who can become new actors in delivering these community level educational programs. And that again, Mahin is saying, what about the fathers? Of course, fathers cannot be ignored either. But what I was highlighting the role of the mothers, because the fathers may be what we see is that they may be out of onto the earning the income part of it if they're there. But let's not get distracted from that agenda. But community level actors are another important possibility. And here it's a point I am coming later, but I want to connect it right away here. Rukmini mentioned about the NREGA. We have a counterpart here. It's called EGPP, Employment Generation Program for the Poorest, and World Bank funded. It started in 2008 when actually myself and Rashida were part of the government. There is a new initiative in that program. It's called EGPP Plus. NREGA, as Rukmini has rightly mentioned, these were mostly thought of as workfare programs, earthwork, etc., etc. But it all needs a conceptual redesigning. That the activity, the scheme, the project need not be about earthwork. For example, this education, this community level worker could be funded through their EGPP Plus program. In fact, they're going to roll it out in Cox's Bazar area, perhaps, and maybe across the country. But the real challenge would be there, EGPP Plus program, and that's like NREGA Plus program, maybe, if we are talking about. The government will actually look for what are the activities under that plus that can make sense. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity here of really pushing for a education-linked EGPP Plus activity, which will drive this community level, catching up part of it, motivational loss reversal part of it, etc. And to build on Anir's point, it's not just blended learning. I think there is a great opportunity here, but let's not get caught up on this too much, but it's a potential entry point, which I heard when I was looking at the BRAC's field level experiments, that there is an opportunity for pedagogic innovation also. Anil mentioned that teacher moving from the lecturer to facilitator mode. The facilitator mode need not only be limited to the style of lecturing. It can be extended further, learning from nature actually, learning from the environment. There are pedagogic innovational possibilities. I don't want to go too deep into it, but that's one possibility. So first entry point is that community space. It is absolute must if we want to address this motivational loss, this learning loss. And it's a win. Ineffective one. I think we must get together. I think there is no option for us not to be to miss this opportunity. It's absolute must. We have to do it. Second action plan, I think both Rashida and Anir mentioned that the others really did not really focus on that. The teachers have to be also be kept in focus. And teachers have to be onboarded on these new roles in an effective manner. We have been talking about student dropout. One of the new evidence we have found, not part of the PPRC BIGD study, but others, that there is a huge amount of teacher dropouts also. That's also a crisis which is happening. And the onboarding the teachers, and that's another whole area of teacher training, etc. What sort of packages to develop. I'm talking here, of course, not in the longer term reform agenda, but on this COVID response agenda. Third action space, of course, is on the focus on the school itself. To restart the normal classes. And I think the catch-up classes should not be burdened on the school. Catch-up classes will succeed only if they are off school hours. If you pose that within the school timing, it is not going to work. It has to be thought of either within that community space learning agenda or off school hours agenda. I think that's very important. On the school itself, I won't go into, if I look at the longer term reform agenda, I think Rukmini and Rachel and others have mentioned, there is a huge agenda that will have to, those are not in a way to be put aside when we try to respond to the COVID crisis. Those also continue equally. But COVID-related school, there's one issue which has come up, which is the assessment issue. I think this will have to be addressed even now. The assessment is a challenge area. Various types of experiments are happening, but this is somewhere we need to get all our thoughts together and give a better way forward here. The school calendar needs to be looked at. Some solutions there, perhaps the innovations, etc. So there is a longer term, reform agenda related to school that has been well articulated. No addition there. The fourth action space, which everyone, the PPRC BIGD study has brought forth, others I think have endorsed, is that there was already a problem of inequality pre-COVID. COVID has significantly aggravated inequality across multiple dimensions. The learning loss is one, and the inequality has been driven by several things. There are two. One is entry barriers. It's either infrastructural entry barriers, access, etc., or costs, which have also been mentioned. So inequality is a reality, and there, how do you really add to that? How do you respond to this, solve this inequality issue? I think certainly the community space is one of the way to address the inequality, because that's where you can really, those who are missing out, they're catching up, and the motivation loss, etc., can be covered up. And you can cover it through some of this social protection program. Anil mentioned this stipend program. He is exploring that to add the technical innovation part. But I think here is a straightforward fiscal opportunity. Rachel has mentioned that we have to prioritize, but I think here the priority is very clear. It can be done. The fiscal priority is that we have I think it's about 7.8 million primary children who get 100 taka per month. This 100 taka benefit level was fixed in 2004. It has now become perhaps 25% of its value now remain. There is an opportunity here. You have a clientele, you have a delivery method in place. All you need to is to funnel the money. If you can just I have asked that this should be increased to 500 per month. That is an immediate economic boost to these households, which can address some of these education cost burdens. It's an immediately doable thing, also for the secondary stipends. So 2 of the social protection programs of government should immediately be leveraged. One is the stipend program. The clientele is there, the delivery method and all the procedure is in place. All you need is to funnel the fiscal report. And the other is this other EGPP plus type of idea. Now there's a third one that Rukmini mentioned about the school meal. Now, there has been some progress here, but recently there was a setback, or not a setback. The Prime Minister actually declined a proposal on the school meal program on a right ground. In some sense, she has her, the arguments are right, is that the management and the delivery of the school meal has not been thought through sufficiently. And her concern, the Prime Minister's concern, is that it may conflict with the educational delivery load of the schools and the management. Here is an opportunity of beginning a different type of starting that, not to link it up with the school, but with that community space. And one can have an entry point there on which lessons can be learned of a community level solution to the school meal program. I think the policymakers here are rather conservative or reluctant. Even the teachers, I have talked to the teachers, they're also reluctant to take on management load of a school meal program. There is not a, in that sense, the takers are not there. But if we introduce that in that community space, through some initial innovation, I think there is a great deal of opportunity. Finally, I would say that last point, which Imran also highlighted, is that we have to be realistic. There will be a big chunk of youth who will have dropped out. We have to think of a COVID dropout cohort skill program. I think that's another action space on which we need to put our thoughts together. Obviously, the content will have to be developed, but that's also one agenda. The existing skill program, all are there, etc., etc. Is skill program in Bangladesh, actually skill program, despite all its presence, has not really taken off. And that's also because of a framing weakness. For the population at large, skill is translated as technical education. And there is a perception problem that technical education is the education for the poor. And today's youth do not want to be saddled with the education of the poor. We need a reframing approach to the whole age. And I think for this COVID dropout cohort, one can, really look for a new type of skill program. So those are some of the, I've mentioned about 2 framing sort of pathways and 5 action spaces in which we can think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zilur Bhai. It's always, just sort of, I think, extremely I think amazing in terms of how you sort of managed to bring it together and help us think forward. And sort of, I think this whole points around the 2 framing challenges that you have mentioned are extremely, I think, pertinent. And I think we need to really think about that in terms of really thinking about our next work that we do. So I don't want to, I just want to thank everyone at this stage. We're, 5 minutes sort of beyond what I sort of requested from all of you. But thank you all so much. There are questions. I think we have been trying to answer many of them. I think many were answered in as we went along. So thank you all very much. Just like to say that we are going to finalize our brief, the evidence to action brief based on the conversations we had today In particular, I think, all of you, but what Zillur Bhai tried to frame, which we will bring it all together, share it with all of you before we finalize this. So this is going to be a concrete output that we want out of this. So that's the first thing. And then I think we need to sort of continue this discussion in terms of how do we take some of these ideas forward. In particular, from BIGD's side, I will just like to say that this is the whole education space, the human capital space is something that we are deeply interested in sort of working on, and I think there are a number of the way I think Zillur Bhai has framed it. I think there are very important social science entry points, social science perspective in terms of how we think about some of the future way forward in terms of the educational crisis that we currently have. So this has been extremely rich, and I think a lot of food for thought. So thank you all very much for your challenging time zone adjustments and staying on at least half an hour longer than we planned. Thank you all very much, and we'll be back in touch with you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Very much. Bye-bye.